What's up YouTube, and welcome to another draw along with me. Today's design is this Halloween paper cutout style. There's a link in the description down below to the Procreate file that you're going to need, which will include the textures that are part of this design. Where at the very top here we've got some extra paper layers here which give you that really cool paper effect, and the link is in the description to that. You're also going to need the palette as well as the Halloween stamp for this hand. And there's also a link to the tree collection that's also in the background there as well. If you're new here, I post Procreate content every single week, so hit that subscribe button down below if you'd like to get some weekly tutorials. But if you can't get enough tutorials, there's a link in the description to my Patreon where you can get extra access to even more tutorials every single month. And with that said, let's get started. So once you're into your canvas, let's just take a look quickly at the Procreate file I've given you. We've got a texture file right on the very top, which has got two layers in, which will give us our paper look to everything. And then we've got an empty layer, which we can start working on, as well as then a background color, which has already been set to the correct color. So from here, we're going to work on this layer here. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is change your color out. We can pick this color here in the top left-hand corner of our palette. And then we're going to go ahead and use the monoline brush, which is under calligraphy. And you want to set your brush size to maximum there on the left. Now what you also want to do is tap on monoline and just make sure streamline is turned all the way up. That will smooth out your lines and make them nice and smooth as we draw them out. And then what we want to try and draw is some sort of like wobbly shape, which we're going to add our full design into. So you want to maybe pick a point to start with. I might start, for example, up here in this top left hand corner, and just draw out a squiggly shape like this, and then link up your shape. And then what you want to do is then zoom in and just tidy up any imperfections. Maybe you need to smooth out a line like so, but don't worry about the rounded part on the outside. You just want to smooth this out, because then what we're going to do is we're going to drag and drop our color into the outer area, and that will give us our area that we're going to work within for this design. Now what we're going to do with this shape is we're going to go ahead and duplicate it multiple times and get the layering in there. Then we're going to add the details, and then we're going to add all of the shadows and highlights. So with this shape, this is going to be our template for every layer going backwards in the design. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to our layer, we're going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it. And then the bottom one, we're going to change it to the next color. So we're going to grab the next color, which is the second color in the palette on that top row, drag and drop the color in. You won't see any difference on the outside. But then what we're going to do is we're going to grab our cursor. You want to make sure you're using the uniform option, and then you want to grab the node maybe in the top right hand corner, scale it down, and then position that in the center until you get those orange lines running through. And if you don't get the orange lines, make sure you turn on snapping, and that will give you your orange lines. Now you want to create a nice gap between the two shapes, and every layer that we create now keeps getting smaller and smaller into the background. And in total, we're going to end up with 6 different variations of this in terms of size. So don't go too small too quickly. Maybe I'll go a smidge smaller again and position that nicely in the center. Now what you'll see around the edges, a little bit of space still, because obviously we scaled that whole layer down. There's a little bit of a gap around the edge, and you just simply grab your color and drag and drop it into the gap around the outside, and it'll fill in everything around the outside now with your color. We're going to go ahead and do that again. So we're going to go to our layers. The layer we're just working on, we swipe it to the left and duplicate it. The bottom one out of the two, we then tap on and go to our colors and select the next color in our palette, the third one. Drag and drop your color in, and you won't see any change, but then go ahead and grab your cursor and scale that down again, and you want to position it with those lovely orange lines in the center there. And we're now already starting to get a little bit of depth in there. Tap on your cursor when you're done, and you want to try and keep your gaps pretty similar to one another. For example, I could maybe go a little bit smaller than that again, like so. Then we're going to do the same. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to swipe on that layer to the left and duplicate. The bottom one out of the two, we're going to go back up to our colors. We're going to grab the fourth color. We're going to drag and drop that into the space. Now you won't see anything change until we grab our cursor. Scale that down with the uniform tool. Make sure you're happy with the gap around the outside and hitting those lovely orange lines to let us know we keep hitting the center of the design, and that's good. Then we're going to go ahead and repeat the process again. So we're going to go up to our layers. We're going to swipe on that layer to the left and duplicate it. The bottom one out of the two, we go up to our colors, and then we pick out the next color in the palette, which should be the 5th color in the palette. And then grab your color and drag and drop it into the space here. and then grab your cursor and just scale that down until you get those orange lines. And then we're going to do that one more time. We're going to go to our layers, swipe that to the left and duplicate it. The bottom one, we're going to grab our colors and grab the last color on this top row, so the 6th color along, and then drag and drop it into the space of the squiggle, making sure that you do it there. Otherwise, if I drag it on the outside, you won't see a change in terms of the color itself. But then grab the node and then just scale that down until you hit the center of the design. You get those orange lines, and then tap on your cursor when you're done. And then you'll end up with this sort of design where we're flowing into the background, and that's where our moon is going to sit right back there. So now we've got the foundation of our layers, and then we've got the texture running through them every time we draw them on. We can now start on each layer to add in the detail that sits on that layer. So let's go back up. We're going to go to this layer here, which is the top one, the surrounding one. We're going to go to our colors and select that color, which is the first color, and now we're going to go from the top again all the way down through the layers, adding details to each one. So for this one, we're going to go ahead and create a new layer so we've got some flexibility with the object we add. So let's create a new layer above it. Let's go up to the brush and the stamp that I've provided in the description, the Halloween hand. We're simply going to just tap in the middle of the screen and we'll get our Halloween hand there coming out the ground. And then you can use your cursor if you want to, just to scale it up or down and position it where you want it. Now I want to position mine down in this right hand corner because we're going to have a tree, then we're going to have a haunted house in the background, and then we're going to have some hills and filler space in the back. So you don't want to go too big with your hand, you kind of want to just position it down in this bottom right hand corner somewhere so it's got enough space for a shadow. So I'm going to put mine roughly like so. I think that's good. And then when you're happy with your positioning, you can simply now pinch that layer to its layer underneath. So if you've done your layers correctly and it's the outside one, it's the same color, you can just pinch those two together and now they're on one layer. Let's move down to the next layer and see what we're going to add for this one. So the next layer here, if I turn it on and off, is the next green down. So we're going to change our color out to the second green in the palette. We're then going to go ahead and on a new layer above that layer, we're going to go to our brush library. We're going to go to calligraphy and we're going to use the script brush. Now I've got a different variation of it where I've adjusted some of the settings, but I'll leave a link to it in the description down below. But for me it's called script 1. And for this one, we're just going to draw in a tree. Now the best way to do this is to draw in the trunk and then we can build off all the branches off of that. So we're using this color here and on that sort of space. So just start off by drawing in your trunk, and you can make it kind of squiggly and wobbly and going up and down until you sort of fill out that main space in the middle, and then fill in that space with your brush as well. And you want to leave a little bit of a gap on the left. Potentially I could just fill that out a little bit more. And then once you've done that, we can add in some branches. So let's add in a branch here. So that's just a fairly large one, and my brush size is set to 68% at the minute, because the script brush is brilliant because you can be super thin like that, but if I press really hard I get a solid line. So we can vary the amount of pressure we want to add depending on where we're adding it. And I want to create some branches that go all the way across over to the right hand side. So the first point is to start roughly here and then make our way across. So start off very lightly and just build out a sort of squiggly wobbly line, and that's your sort of foundation branch. And then from there you can go ahead and thicken it out towards the trunk of the tree here and add all those different branches off of it. So I can start here, I can maybe create a different branch up here, and then making sure that the thickest part of this branch as it comes off the tree is obviously here rather than down the end there. And then you may need to go in like I have and just thicken up some of these lines if necessary. But once you've got your foundation sort of lines, we can then just go in and start adding in lots of little branches off of there. So we can create some nice squiggles and then create another squiggle there. And see, I'm pressing very lightly at times just to create some nice branches. Let's create one just tailing off down here like so. And if you get some nice points in there, it'll really add towards this sort of creepy Halloweeny sort of look to things. I'm going to create another branch just veering up here out of the design, and then likewise there, creating some little branches and some sort of zigzaggy lines. That looks cool. And then let's go ahead and maybe add in another big trunk here that's just making its way off, big branch should I say, and then some squiggly lines off of them too. So some lines there, maybe even sort of a line here and there, maybe not that one. And I think having zoomed out, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm not going to add too much detail. We want to try and leave lots of gaps so that you can see all the sort of layers in behind, but just enough that it covers up sort of that top area. It goes from left to right and you get a nice selection. Maybe you could just fill out this area here as well down by the trunk in the corner. But other than that, we've got our tree on that layer. Now again, we've made it a separate layer. So what we have to do is to pinch it to the one below it and just make sure it's the correct layer that you're pinching it to. So just pinch those two together. And now we've got the hand on its layer. We've got the branches and the tree on one layer. And now we'll move down to the next one. So above that layer, by tapping on it, let's create a new layer. Let's grab our next color, which should be the third color in the palette. We're just simply making our way from left to right here. Now for this one, we want to draw in a house. Now there's quite a simple way to do this. We're going to go ahead and grab our selection tool. We're going to go to rectangle and we're going to go to color fill. Now everything that we now draw in on the screen, like I'll show you now, will be a square or a rectangle depending on what sort of shape you add in, and it will fill in with the color automatically. So what this allows us to do is to sort of build up our building of our haunted house. So I'm going to start with a sort of main area here, and then I'm going to build an off section here, and you can see where I'm adding my shapes to this building. I'm then going to add a sort of skinny one off here, and then a larger one just here on the left hand side. So I've added 4 rectangles in total, and you can see my shapes. And then when you're done, simply tap on your selection tool and you'll be left with that shape. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create the triangles for the peaks. Now I do want to create a separate layer for this for a second, so we're going to go to our layers and create another new layer. Then we're going to go ahead and grab the selection tool again, but if you change it to freehand, that will allow you to simply tap and create points, and as long as you link up your shape, you can create a sort of any shape you like, but we're going to use it to create a triangle. So what we're going to do is we're going to start roughly above this main point and create a triangle. So point there, you want to go slightly wider over here, slightly wider again over here, and then simply tap on the dot at the top to create your triangle peak. Tap on your selection tool when you're done and you will now have a triangle shape that we can now use and adjust in the other areas. So we're going to go up to our layers. I'm going to swipe on that triangle to the left and duplicate it. Then the top one, I'm going to grab our cursor and the uniform option and just scale that down and then move it to where you want it. So I want to put one on this left hand side like so, and then I want to put one on the right hand side as well. So I'm going to go to my layer again. I'll probably duplicate that layer as well by swiping it to the left and tapping on duplicate, grab my cursor and then just move that triangle over to the right, maybe even just scale it down or bigger or smaller how you want, just for some varying sizes, and then tap on your cursor when you're done and you should end up with this sort of house, sort of pointed house shape on the left hand side there. What we're then going to do is merge all of the building together, so we've got 3 triangles in total and all the rectangles we drew. I'm going to pinch those together so that's all on one layer now. And then just grab your cursor and just position it where you want it. So maybe you want to hide it slightly in behind this tree to give some focus here, or maybe you want to do it on the other side. It's totally up to you. I'm going to position mine just so that I've got the tiniest gap between it and my tree here, just so you can see this nice triangle edge on the left there, and it's just in the distance. So with that done, same process really. We go up to our layers and we make sure it's about to be merged onto the correct layer, and we just simply pinch those 2 layers together, and now all the top 3 layers have their details on. We can then move on to the next one, which is the slightly lighter green in behind. Now these ones here I've done with trees and sort of a forest in the background, so you'll need the tree collection that's in the link in the description down below. And for this one we need to switch our colour out correctly first of all, and this is the 4th layer, so we go to the 4th colour. We go up to our brush library. Let's grab the tree collection, as I mentioned, that's in the description. And you can pick any tree you want for this. You can also pick multiple varying trees if you like. I'm going to select tree 15. It doesn't matter which one you choose. And then I'm going to go ahead and on that, directly on that layer, I'm not going to create a new layer this time. I'm simply just going to start tapping away and creating the tree. Now, for example, I'm just going to do it in the middle of the screen so you can see. If I tap away, we're obviously repeating that tree quite a lot. So what you kind of need to do is just tap away a couple of times sometimes, just to break up that tree. For example, if I just do this all the time, it's just going to become quite a repetitive tree process, which is why I say if you want to, chuck in some different trees in there. But if you tap away and make sure the gaps in between the trees are different, you can get away with it by just tapping away. Now my brush size is set to 28%, and we're going to add basically a bunch of trees in here in this right hand side. So I'm going to go from roughly here and tapping away to create some sort of forest there. And you'll notice that we can't really see too much in terms of this is just background space we're filling in right now. But something like that is good. Now what you do need to be aware of is you do need to fill the entire space. So what you can do is just turn off the 3 layers that are above, and then you'll see what you're left with. And I've got a little gap here, so I'm just going to keep tapping away until I fill the gap. Don't worry about the gap so much near the trees, just making sure that this space here is nice and solid, and then you'll end up with the correct amount of filler. Then if we go back up to our layers and turn those 3 back on above it, we can now see that it's really starting to come together with the different levels of depth. We're going to move on and add some more trees on the layer in behind that. So we're going to go to our layers. It's the 5th layer, so we're going to go to the 5th color in our palette. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're then going to grab a different tree just to vary it up a little bit. I'm going to go for 14, and I'm going to make sure my brush size is probably set to a bit smaller than what it was. I'm going to set it to, let's have a look. Let's go for something about 30%, maybe even smaller than that. I'm going to go for 20. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go on that layer again. You can turn it on and off just to see whereabouts it is you're about to work on. So I can see that it's going to tuck right in behind here in the trees. And what we want to do is we want to layer up these forests. So I'm going to come from up here, tapping away in behind, and then in behind the forest of trees that we've just created just a second ago. And again, once you're happy with your positioning of your forest, like I am, we're then going to go to our layers and just turn off all the layers above. So turn off all 4, just to make sure we're not left with a gap. And then we're going to go ahead and fill that gap in. The reason for the gap and filling it in is just to make sure that when we add our shadows, we don't end up with any weird sort of shapes come into it. So something like that is good. We're then going to go back up to our layers and turn on all those layers above. And we can see we're really building up that forest in the background. We've got one more layer to do that on. So we're going to go back up to our layers. We're going to go to the very bottom layer now. It's the 6th layer, so we're going to change it out to the 6th color. We're then going to go to our brush library. I'm going to pick a different tree. I'm going to go for 17. I'm going to make sure my brush size is a lot smaller, probably around about 10, maybe even 12%. And I know what layer I'm working on by turning it on and off, and I'll move it to the left hand side so you can see. We're working on that one there. So we've really only got a very small amount of space to sort of work with just in here, but we're going to apply the same principles of just building up a forest. So I'm going to just tap away in that space, just creating some trees and a different sort of landscape back there. Like so, and I'm trying to just vary up that brush size a little bit by putting some very close together. Now, what we need to also bear in mind is the same for the gap. So let's turn off all 5 layers above and just see what we're working with. I can see I've got a little gap here. Tap away, fill that space, and then when we go back and turn on all of those layers, we end up now with all of the structure in place for our scene. We can then add in our moon, and then we can start adding in all the sort of 3D shadow effects, which will really bring this to life. So let's go up to our layers. Let's create a new layer. Right at the very bottom, we need to drag it just above our background color. I'm going to switch our color out to white, and you can double tap in the top left hand corner to select white from your disc, from the disc section. You're then going to want to go up to your brush library, calligraphy, and change it back to the monoline brush. Doesn't matter what your brush size is, just as long as you draw a circle in the middle of the screen, hold your pen at the end to get an ellipse, but pop your finger on the screen to get a perfect circle. And then once you've got a circle roughly around about that size, drag and drop your color in, grab your cursor. Potentially you could scale this up a little bit, hitting that orange line across the middle, both horizontally and vertically, and then you've got your nice moon right in the very back there, which will give us a nice sort of center point to look at. So next comes the fun bit where we start to add in all the lighting and shadows, and it's kind of a repetitive process as well, just the same as what we did in terms of going back from front to back. So what do we need to do? We need to add in a set of highlights. We also need to add in a set of shadows. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to our layers. We're going to go to the very top layer first of all. We're going to swipe on that layer to the left and duplicate it. Now the bottom one out of the 2, we need to go to our colors, and this green here in the bottom left hand corner, we're going to go ahead and we're going to drag our color into that design. So look where your design is. So obviously around the edges, I can drag and drop that green in. Again, you won't see any visual change, but just check your layers. You should end up with a dark layer and then bright green layer. Now the top one, you simply tap on that layer and use the option of clipping mask. Then this layer now is clipped to the green, meaning if we decide to move that layer in any way, we will end up potentially revealing or hiding a little bit of green from underneath. So we've got the dark layer on top. And what we want to simply do is, if we zoom out a tiny bit, I want to have my lighting come from the top right hand corner. So I want all the lighting to hit the left edges. So I'm going to simply tap in the bottom left hand corner once, twice, and 3 times. And then if we tap on our cursor when we're done, we'll notice now everything has a lovely highlight on that right hand edge of the hand, but the right hand edge inside here, meaning when we add our shadows up here, we've got shadows and then highlights. So the logic behind that is the green stays static underneath, but you're just moving the black, which then reveals a little bit of the green. That's how you get that little highlight. Next, we're going to go up to our layers. On the green layer, the one that's sat underneath, we're going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it. We're going to go up to our colors. We're going to double tap at the bottom of the disc to select black. We're going to go back to that layer and we're going to drag and drop it into the space around the outside again. Meaning now we've got 3 layers. We've got our original dark layer, the highlight layer green, and now this black layer. And if we go up to our adjustments, Gaussian blur and layer, we're going to swipe from left to right and you'll see a little percentage bar at the top. We want to go all the way up until you hit 10%. And then tap on your adjustments when you're done. Now we're going to leave it be for a second because we're going to move all the shadow layers at the same time as we get through this, meaning they'll all have the same angle and distance from one another, creating a very perfect lining of shadows and making sure it's nice and consistent. So you can see there's a little bit of a shadow there already appearing, which looks pretty cool. Next, then go down to our next layer, which is the tree layer, and repeat the same processes. So we're going to swipe that to the left and duplicate it, and then we're going to tap on the bottom one. We're going to go up to our colors. We're going to go to this bright green, which is our highlight color in the bottom left of our palette. We're going to go to that layer and we're going to drag and drop it onto the tree because we know that's part of the layer. And now you should end up with a green one and the original one. On the original one, you tap on it, you do a clipping mask to the green layer. And on this layer, we're going to zoom out a smidge. We're going to go to our cursor and we're going to tap in this bottom left hand corner 3 times. And what that does is it moves it every single time a pixel in that direction. So undo that. We're going to go 1, 2, 3. And then tapping on our cursor, we end up with that highlight around the edge of the tree. It looks awesome around the branches as well. Looks fantastic. Then we go ahead and we need to create our shadow. So we go to the bottom color, the green one. We swipe it to the left and duplicate it. The bottom one, we go to our colors. We double tap at the bottom here to select black, and then we drag and drop that onto the tree. Now again, you won't see any change because there's layers stacked above it. We've got our original one, our green highlight, and then what will now be our shadow layer. And we'll do the same process. We're going to go to adjustments, Gaussian blur and layer. I'm going to swipe from left to right until we hit 10% at the top there, and then tap on your cursor or your adjustments when you're done. And then we've got a shadow on that layer. Again, we'll move them all directional in a minute. We're going to get through all of our other layers first. So you can see there's a building up process. We build up a highlight, we build up a shadow, and then we move on. And that's what we're going to do for all of these layers. I'm not going to skip ahead. I'm going to do it with you in unison so we make sure we're all doing the same thing. Let's go down to the next layer, which is the castle layer or the building layer. And then we're going to do the same process. We're going to swipe on it to the left. We're going to duplicate it. We're going to keep the original one at the top. We can even tap on it and clipping mask it now if we want to. Let's go down to the next one down, which is the base layer. We're going to go up to our colors and select our highlight color here in the bottom left and then drag it onto the building. Again, you won't see any change for a minute, but then we're going to go back up to our original color. I'm going to grab our cursor. I'm going to pinch out a little bit so I can see. I'm going to tap in the bottom left hand corner 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And then tap on my cursor when I'm done. You should see your highlight now appear on the edge of the building as well as around the edge of that layer. Then we're going to go and create a shadow. So we go to the green layer, the brighter one. We swipe it to the left and duplicate it. We then go to that layer. We then go up to our colors and double tap to select black and drag and drop it into the element, which is the house on this occasion. Then we're going to grab our adjustments, Gaussian blur and layer. And we're going to swipe from left to right until we hit 10%. And then tap on your adjustments when you're done. We're then going to move on to the next layer back, which is our sort of trees there on this right hand edge. So I'm going to go to that layer, we're going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it. I'm going to tap on that layer, the top one, and clipping mask it. But then we're going to go to the bottom one. We're going to switch it out to our highlight color. So tap on your color, go to your color here in the bottom left, drag and drop it into that space of the trees. Again, you might not see a great change, but then we're going to grab our layer above that's clipped to it, and then we're going to go up to our cursor, and using the uniform still, we're just going to tap 3 times in the bottom left hand corner. 1, 2, 3. This looks cool because when we tap on our cursor and we're done and we zoom in at what we've achieved, we've added a nice highlight on the edge of it, which looks really cool. We're then going to go to our green layer. We're going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it. The bottom one, we're going to go up to our colors, double tap to select black at the bottom of the disc, drag it onto the element that you know is on that layer, which is the trees. And then looking at your layers just to make sure everything worked out alright. I'm going to go up to our adjustments, Gaussian blur and layer, and swipe from left to right until we hit that 10% mark, such as that, and then tap on your adjustments when you're done. We're then going to repeat that process 2 more times. So let's go down to our layers. The next set of trees in the background there, swipe it to the left and duplicate it, tap on the top one, clipping mask. The bottom one we need to change to our highlight green, so to make sure you're on that highlight layer, let's go down to our colors in the bottom left hand corner and drag and drop that color into the element you know is on that layer, which is these sets of trees. We're then going to go to that top layer that's clipped. We're going to go to our cursor and we're going to tap 3 times in the bottom left hand corner. 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to tap on the cursor when we're done. We're then going to go up to our layers and go down to the base layer and the highlight green one, swipe it to the left and duplicate it. The bottom one that we've now just added, we're going to go up to our colors, double tap to select black at the bottom of your disc, drag and drop it onto the element you know is on that layer. Then we're going to grab our adjustments, Gaussian blur and layer, and swipe from left to right until we hit that 10% mark right at the top of the screen, and then tap on your adjustments when you're done. Then we're going to go ahead and go down to the final layer. Going to repeat the process, so swipe on that layer to the left, the top one, we tap on it and we clipping mask it, and then we're going to go ahead and on the bottom one, going to go to our colors and change it out to our bright green in the bottom left, drag and drop it onto the element you know is on that layer, which is those trees right in the back there, just in front of our moon. We're then going to grab our layers, going to go to the top layer. On the top layer we're going to grab our cursor and we're going to do the same process. We're going to tap 1, 2, 3 in the bottom left hand corner, and that will give us our tiny little highlight on the edge of these trees, which you can't really see too much because the brighter colors are down there in the back. Then we're going to go to our layers, the bottom one, we swipe it to the left and duplicate it. We go down to the bottom one and we go to our colors, double tap to select black and drag and drop it onto the element that's on that layer, which is those trees. And then grab our adjustments, Gaussian blur and layer, and then we're going to swipe from left to right until we add in that 10% mark there, and then tap on your adjustments when you're done. Now we don't want to just add all these shadows just to these layers, we also want to add it onto our moon. So let's go down to the moon. The moon's a little bit different, we can swipe it to the left and duplicate it. We're not going to add a highlight on the right hand edge because the green would end up actually technically being darker than the actual moon itself. All we're going to do is add a shadow, so we're going to go to our layers, and because it's white we can simply tap on the bottom one and invert it, and then but the same process here, go to adjustments, Gaussian blur and layer, and swipe that layer from left to right, adding in the magic 10%. Now we've got all of our shadows and we're getting a little bit of depth here, but the point that really brings this across and a nice little element of the lighting is to move those all in unison in an angle together. So we're going to go up to our layers, and what we need to be aware of here is we need to swipe and select on every single layer that's a shadow. So take a look at your layers, each one should have 3 and it should always start essentially from a clipped layer to the green highlight layer to then the shadow layer. And what we want to do is we want to select all of our shadows. So I'm currently on the shadow for the moon in the back. I'm going to swipe from left to right on every shadow layer, and you should notice them because they're the ones that are in dark and they're underneath the bright green layer. So swiping from left to right on all of those layers, you should end up with all of those selected. Now when we go up to our cursor and we use that uniform option, we're going to drag our shadows around, and watch what I do when I sort of move that around. we end up with shadows moving on all of the items at the exact same time. Now all of our layers are selected, we're going to go ahead and drag somewhat in this space here from the top-ish right down towards the bottom left, just a smidge. And when we do, we'll move all those layers at exactly the same time, and then we'll end up with a shadow that's all facing that way. Now you can be super dramatic if you want to make it even further, but it's all about subtlety with this at times, just making sure you add enough of the shadow but not too much, and making sure you tap on your cursor when you're done, and you'll end up with all of your shadows in here. Then if you want to, you can go up to your layers, and because you've all got them selected still, you have to do it individually though, but if you want to, you could lower the shadow down, maybe to say something like 60%, and you'd have to do that on all of those layers. It depends on how dramatic you want your layers to be in terms of their shadows, but just drag the bar down to 60% on all of those if you want to. Again, it depends on how much shadow you want to add in on yours. I'm tapping on all of my highlighted shadow layers that I know we've just been adjusting, and just reducing that down to 60% on all of those, like so. And then we've got our shadows nicely faded in there as well, not too dark and overpowering. Now what we also want to do is just add a glow in this top right hand corner to symbolize where the lighting's coming from, and to do that we're simply going to go up to our layers, and right at the very top just tap on that layer and create a new one. If it's clipped, simply tap on it and turn off clipping mask. Then what we're going to do is select that bright green in the bottom left hand corner of our palette. We're going to go up to our brush library, and we're going to go to airbrushing and the soft brush. And my brush size is set to about 40%. I'm going to simply tap in the middle of the screen. And then what you'll end up with this sort of orb of light. And I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to increase that right up. I'm going to move it up into this top right hand corner. Something like that, so we get a little bit of that bleed colour come onto the design. I'm then going to go up to my cursor when I'm done, and you'll end up with this. But then what we have to do is just clip it to that top layer. So go to your layers, tap on that layer and hit clipping mask, and it will add that lighting in the top right hand corner, which helps to emphasize where the light is coming from and why you're getting those shadows, also the highlights from your design. Now I would potentially just lower that opacity down, maybe to something say 60% as well, just everything somewhat the same strength. Now there's actually one tiny little thing we need to do where we've moved the layer, the top layer anyway, we end up with a tiny slither of green down this right hand edge. All we need to do to fix that is go to this layer here, the dark one on the top of the highlight green color. Grab your color in your first color on the palette, top left, and zoom right in. You'll see that green line. Just drag and drop that into that space, and that completes the full design. And if I go full screen with 4 fingers, we end up with today's finished Halloween paper cut design. If you like this tutorial, please drop a like down below. It helps the channel out an awful lot. And if you'd like some weekly tutorials to follow along with, hit the subscribe button. If you completed today's design, be sure to tag me in it on Instagram. I'll be sure to share it to my story, as well as there's also a link to my Discord if you want to come and join my growing community over there. And as always, if you can't get enough Joel Create tutorials, there's a link in the description down below to my Patreon. I'll throw my patrons' names up on the screen now, where if you'd like to get access to even more tutorials every single month, as well as extra benefits on my Discord server, as well as sneak peeks of upcoming designs, hit the link in the description down below and show your support, and I'll see you in the next one.